Hi, Monica. This is Chris Meyer. I'm a domestic violence and divorce attorney for the greater Houston area. Thank you for coming on my podcast. Do you want to tell us a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, hi Chris. I really appreciate talking to you today. Um, I am a psychologist in Hong Kong and a coach in the U.S. and I specialize in attachment, loss, and trauma. So I'm really looking forward to talking about how domestic violence or abuse or trauma might show up in family law.
Okay, well, perfect. Okay, well, as a family law attorney, I deal with lots of people who have been through trauma, whether it's physical violence, sexual violence, but that's the most, or I guess the biggest areas of domestic abuse that I see is like emotional abuse, isolation,
Mm-hmm.
minimizing, denying, and blaming the other spouse, or economic abuse. But um,
Yeah.
and all of these things can cause trauma. So I guess what advice would you have for people who have been through trauma? What have you seen, and what advice would you give them?
When we've been through trauma, any kind of trauma, right? And so you're talking about some maybe attachment traumas, which is linked to our attachment system. And attachment trauma could be cheating, control, manipulation, emotional abuse. And the reason why this is a trauma is because our attachment system is basically our nervous system. It's linked to our survival. And so if we have a partner who's treating us this way, then all of a sudden we feel like we're under threat. We feel like our survival is at stake. We might even feel like we're dying if we feel abandoned or neglected, because as humans, we're social animals and we can't survive alone. So this is where it gets tricky for abuse survivors is what's a real threat and what's a false alarm.
Okay.
So
Can you explain?
yeah. So when people have PTSD or just been under a lot of abuse, a neutral face can look like a threat. You know, someone changes their tone and it's not personal, it can feel like a threat. And so people might feel that heat come up, or they might feel that fight or flight come up. A lot of abuse survivors go into something called fawn. If I can just people please and I won't be harmed.
Yeah. Okay.
And so this means our nervous system is a little bit heightened. And so the best thing you can do if you feel like you're getting anxious or you're hypervigilant is to get help. But outside of getting help, it's important to decompress every day, to do something every day to bring down your nervous system. And that might look different for everyone. For some people, it's mindfulness. For some people, it's going for a walk, exercising. Exercise is actually really important because trauma is stored in our body, and that kind of helps us release it. And then, of course, we need to pay attention to our thoughts. And it's really hard to be objective and say, is this a real alarm or a false alarm when our nervous system is on fire? So, yeah, just being cautious of your thoughts and what are you saying to yourself? I'm not safe, I'm abandoned, I'm hopeless.
I guess
Sometimes we need to reframe that. Yeah.
What would you tell somebody who easily goes into fight or flight mode? What would you tell somebody, or what strategies would you give them to help them understand that, okay, this is not a threat, but this is. So let's not everything is not a threat, but some things are, some things are not. So how would you help them distinguish so they're not in a heightened, I guess, state of mind every time there's a perceived threat?
It can be really tricky because sometimes it's not even a conscious thought, right? It's your instant reaction. And so sometimes you need to walk away and calm down. So the first thing is being aware of what's happening in your body, where you're like, okay, I'm clenching my jaw, I'm clenching my fist, I'm about to scream, or I'm about to, I feel like I want to punch somebody, or I feel frozen. Frozen is I can't talk, I can't move, I don't know what to say, or I just want to run away. So just understanding what's happening in your body, and then almost doing the opposite. If you're frozen, trying to find your words. If you want to fight, just say, I need to calm down. walk away and come back. If you want to run away, you have to sit. Sit
Yeah.
and tell yourself, I can tolerate this, I can handle this, I can cope with this. And then you got to work on your nervous system all the time. And it is possible. Unfortunately, people who have trauma, sometimes they feel like they're broken. I'm broken. I can never get out of this. It's not true. You're not broken. We just kind of have to rewire your survival system so that you can feel peace again and you can feel calm again, and that is possible.
What is a way to rewire the brain to help it look at a traumatic memory and maybe think maybe this is not a threat anymore, so I don't need to be worried about it? How could I rewire the brain?
Well, through therapy, you can do EMDR or
Okay.
brain spotting, brain spotting is an offshoot of EMDR. But by yourself, you can say, I'm in the present, because sometimes when people get triggered, it's like the memory that happened a long time ago is very present. So I'm safe. What are my safety cues? And it can be hard if you're having a flashback or a panic attack, but you have to talk to yourself. I can handle this. I can tolerate this. I'm safe. There's the door. I can get out of here. So it's almost like this mind-body dynamic. What's happening in my body? What do I need to say to my body? What's happening in my brain? What do I need to reframe? And do I need to go for a walk? Do I need to listen to some music? And what is it exactly that relaxes you? Sometimes when people are too heightened, they feel like nothing relaxes them. And that's something that needs to be sorted. And if you feel that way, definitely if you're not exercising, do that. Do some cardio, high intense stuff, or lift weights or something.
Well, I notice people sometimes when they're coping with trauma, they tend to self-medicate with drugs and alcohol and or other ways to medicate, like other coping strategies, like maybe going into debt, like maybe shopping or just something, things that make them happy, or gamble, things that make them happy to cope with the trauma, but it doesn't actually help them in the long run because now they're in debt or they're an alcoholic or they're addicted to drugs. So I guess have you seen another path to take would be, I guess, EMDR. So have you seen successes with this, and is it an alternative option for people who might fall into the trap of drugs and alcohol and gambling? And
yeah, and it depends on how far it's gone. So I've had a lot of success with EMDR and brain spotting. Brain spotting in particular is really interesting and fascinating and can work with addictions and things like that. EMDR can as well. But if it's gone too far, whereas people aren't functioning, they've lost their wife, they've lost their house, they might need an addiction specialist.
Okay.
So that self-medicating is kind of sometimes to numb out that nervous system that's on fire. And if it's so painful where you're thinking, I want to self-harm or I want to kill myself, get help right away.
Of course.
Instead of alcohol, a lot of people have a stigma toward medication. And you might only need medication if it's just like PTSD or anxiety or depression. You might not need it for the rest of your life, but it will just take that edge off so you can get help. But what I've also seen working with people going through divorce is that they're afraid if they go to the psychiatrist, if they go to a psychologist, that it will be used against them in court.
Well,
so that can be as well.
Well, I'm a divorce lawyer, and trust me when I tell you, I've seen it like hundreds of times where a spouse is trying to make the other spouse's mental health issue an issue in the divorce. They're accusing the other person of cruelty, cruel treatment, things like that. So I understand why somebody would not want to get help, but at the same time, let me be first to say I can't speak for every divorce, but I can speak for the divorces that I've handled. That if somebody is trying to get help and they want to improve themselves, I have not yet seen a situation where their medical records were used against them, and especially as me as a disabled veteran, I have PTSD from my time overseas when I was in the Army, and I mean, I know because of HIPAA, medical records, therapist records were highly confidential, so I'm confident that it's my records aren't going to just be released willy-nilly, but maybe with a proper subpoena from the court, maybe. But even if the other party is successful at getting that information, there's still a lot of room to keep it from going in front of the judge. So it's
Yeah.
and that's a long way of saying I don't think anybody should not get treatment because they're afraid it's going to be used against them. I mean, it could happen, but I haven't seen it, and there's so many fail-safes in place to protect people who want to get help that they can live with confidence that, it's not going to be used against them. But, I mean, again, I can't speak for every court case. Every case is different. And, but no, I think that's very interesting. So I guess my other question is, you mentioned our nervous system. So how is this all linked to our nervous system?
So I'm going to try and give a long answer in a short way.
Yeah.
So when we're born, they place us on our mom, and that's for our secure attachment. So we feel safe and protected in the world.
Okay.
And as we grow up, we have different kinds of relationships, different kinds of experiences. Whether we feel safe or not in the world has a lot to do with other people.
Okay.
So if I grew up with domestic violence, or if now I'm married to someone with domestic violence, that attachment system, which is how we feel about ourselves and others, is also wired to our survival system, because as babies, we can't survive without a caretaker. And so we might have a partner who's hot and cold, and then we might feel abandoned by them or neglected, and sometimes that can make us feel like we're dying. And so these are the attachment traumas again. But even with PTSD, there's an attachment element, right? It's like, well, I went to war. I don't feel safe with other people all the time. What if they attack me? I've seen what people can do to each other. So this kind of heightens our system again. This heightens our nervous system again. I'm going to court. Can I trust my lawyer? Can I trust the judge? Can I trust my ex not to harm the children? These, again, are going to heighten our nervous system. And so we still need to look for that safety. Maybe my ex isn't safe. What do I need to do to protect my child?
What are some basic tips you would have if maybe someone comes to you because they're having trouble co-parenting? They say their ex is like a narcissist, but you don't really see any evidence that they're narcissists. Maybe it's just, I don't know. I'm not victim shaming or anything, but maybe they've been through trauma, and what they perceive as a threat is really not a threat. How would you help them rewire that story so it's not, they don't see their ex as a threat, but just as as a person, and they need to co-parent? I mean, how would you kind of talk them off that ledge?
I think talking through that can be challenging without some kind of body work, because a lot of this trauma, again, is in our nervous system, our attachment system. So I would try and do some brain spotting for sure. But that being said, it's like, well, I don't see any evidence that this person is a narcissist or has a personality disorder, but who do they remind you of? Do they remind you of your abusive parent? Do they remind you of an abusive ex? And that's kind of the trend these days, right? Is that everyone's divorcing a narcissist because it's all over social media. It's all over everything. And I don't think people truly understand the clinical definition of a narcissist. Yeah,
I know it gets thrown around a lot in family law, and there's some other choice words I hear a lot, but I'm not going to repeat them. But those are from the clients, and they come to me when they come to me on their worst day of their life. So I have to. There's no judgment here. What is the importance of mindfulness for somebody who might have trouble letting go of the trauma, and they keep thinking about the stressful event, and they're just but how would you communicate to them what mindfulness is and the importance of being present and not always relitigating those traumatic memories in their mind?
So I think what happens is, when your nervous system's on fire, you feel like there's a threat, you feel like this person abandoned you. It's really hard to think through, but again, using your body, you can use your senses. And so I like this one. What can I hear? Close your eyes, and what can you hear? And then you see, how far can I hear out? And you'll notice when you close your eyes, you can hear farther and farther. You might hear the bus down the road you wouldn't have noticed earlier. And then with your eyes closed, what can I smell? And sometimes taking something really strong like menthol or mint and just really sitting with that. What can I feel in my body? Where is this trauma causing problems? Where am I tense? Can I send my breath there? Can I expand that area? Can I put something in my mouth, like a strong piece of gum? Because our eyes take up a lot of our sensory information. And so just slowing down, tuning into our other senses can often help us to calm down. And so mindfulness uses our senses and paying attention, like mindfully eating, mindfully brushing our teeth, being very present with that and not allowing our brain to spiral and go into that ruminative state. I mean, again, this is a little oversimplified. It's easier said than done. And
of course.
It's a practice.
Well, you said something interesting. I know to be present, you have to, be mindful of what you breathe, you smell, you feel, you hear, you see. But I guess in breathing, but you said closing your eyes, would that actually help us to pay, because you said so much information comes in through our eyes, it would be beneficial to close our eyes and pay more attention to our other senses?
Yeah, because when our eyes are open, that's where we're focused. Like, I'm looking at you and you have an angry face, or I'm looking at my computer screen and I'm distracted, and we get so distracted by our phone, right? And so, my house is a mess. Everything's a mess. And close your eyes, take it down a notch. Use your other senses. That it's not that we ignore our other senses. It's just that our eyes are very powerful. Our brain is the most powerful organ, and the second one is our eyes. And it sends so much information into our brain, whether we're safe or not. So, there are real threats, right? And so if you are heightened a lot, maybe you need to go somewhere where you feel safe to do this, like your bed or lock a door, just so that you can see, well, what's happening in my body? Where is this trauma showing up?
If the trauma, or if the trigger for the trauma is the abusive spouse, and seeing that spouse is what triggers them, so they obviously need a divorce, but if there's a child involved, unfortunately they need to, I can't speak for every state, but at least in Texas, there's a strong chance they need to learn how to co-parent. Subject to other factors, maybe there's like a protective order because of child abuse or something different like that. But under the general rule is, for most cases, they need to co-parent. But if maybe it's not possible because whenever they even think about their ex, or if they think about the abuse, then it's such a difficult process.
It's really hard. So there's strategies that you can put into place to deal with an abusive ex. If you know you're not going to be physically harmed, if you know your child isn't going to be physically harmed, and it's just a nervous system reaction, there's ways to learn how to communicate with them without being triggered. And part of it, again, is just learning how to calm your nervous system all the time. But have you heard of Bill Eddy? And he wrote that Biff book, like brief, informative, friendly. I can't remember what the other F's are.
No. But let me know what the book's name is, and I'll include it in the article portion associated with this podcast. So, keep going.
So basically, it's about keeping yourself safe by not oversharing. I'm not going to give you too much information. I'm not going to get emotional because you'll use it against me. I will only communicate with you about the children. If you slander me, if you attack me verbally, I will not respond. That is the practical side, but the nervous system side usually needs work too. But co-parenting can be incredibly difficult in this situation. So sometimes people talk about parallel parenting, where you don't necessarily need to communicate with them all the time. You might even have a drop-off where you're not dropping off and picking up. There's someone in place to help with that. Yeah.
Okay. And I guess my final question, and this might be a complex question, so forgive me, but let's say hypothetically somebody comes to you, they're in an abusive environment. They come to you, approach you, and say, I have been through trauma, and you help them, you help teach them strategies, you give them great advice, you even do like brain spotting and maybe EMDR, and you really put them on a path to be successful. And we're happy about that. But then they choose to go back to the abusive environment. Does that undo everything, or what have you seen when victims go back to their abusers after they've had treatment? I mean, does it undo everything, or is it hard to say? Too complicated?
It won't undo everything, but it will heighten the nervous system again, but it's not going to be as high as it was before. So research shows that that people go back to their abuser 7 times before they finally leave. I haven't seen it been that high. For me, it's been 2 or 3 times.
Yeah, I haven't seen 7. I've seen 2 or 3, but not 7.
So it's just, when I say don't give the other parent who's possibly abusive too much information about yourself emotionally, because they know how to get you back, right? They will charm you, all of that. So with the education, with learning how to calm your nervous system, when they go back, their eyes are a little more open. They're a little more aware. They've been educated. They're like, oh, it's happening again. But the most protective factor in this situation is to have a support network, like family, friends who support you. Because when you go back to the abuser, your family and friends will be like, what are you doing? And they might get annoyed and they might want to bail on you. I've seen, unfortunately, women who have nothing because they've been isolated, and that's much harder. But when there's people there to say, look, come stay with me, I got you, we're going to work through this together, that tends to help people to stay out of that abusive situation. But if they come and go, eventually most of the time they'll get there if they're working on it, if they're trying, if they understand this process, if they have a support network. But it's not going to undo any brain spotting or EMDR because every time you do that, your nervous system calms down a little bit.
Okay.
So when the nervous system is too high or too anxious, we're not thinking clearly. We can't focus. We can't access our frontal lobe very well. We can't plan for the future. We can't organize. But bringing it down, then, I can see clear. I get it now. I can think through this.
No, that's great knowledge, and I want to thank you for sharing, Monica. And I'm going to share your information in the article portion associated with my podcast. And if you have any other, great or valuable information or links, I'm happy to share that too. But I want to thank you for visiting me today and sharing this wonderful information.
Yeah, thank you, Chris. I appreciate the opportunity.
Okay. Well, thank you. Thank you so much. And please consider subscribing. Thank you, Monica.
I will. Thank you. Bye.